The day Isabella Nowadaki's life shattered did not begin with thunder or screaming crowds. It began quietly, too quietly, with the slow toll of church bells drifting across the village square. Isabella stood by the edge of the dusty road, her worn sandals sinking slightly into the red earth as villagers passed her in murmuring clusters. Some paused to stare. Others whispered behind raised palms. A few did not bother to hide their contempt. "She's the one," a woman hissed. "The girl who brought disgrace," another replied. Isabella lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around the small brown bag she carried. Inside were only a few things: a notebook, a faded photograph of her late parents, and the money she had earned from weeks of sewing. Nothing that could defend her against an accusation already sealed in people's minds. The scandal had reached the village before the truth could catch its breath. In Lagos, news outlets screamed about the fall of Madam Adekunle, a respected philanthropist and the mother of one of Nigeria's most powerful men, Daniel Obinna Adekunle. Rumors swirled of leaked documents, secret meetings, and a young village girl who had supposedly been seen near the center of it all. That girl was Isabella. She had only met Madam Adekunle once, months ago, when she worked briefly as a cleaner at a charity event. She remembered the woman's gentle smile, the way she had thanked her by name. Nothing more, nothing scandalous, nothing criminal. Yet by evening, her name was everywhere. A black SUV roared into the village, its polished surface reflecting the stunned faces of onlookers. Dust rose like a warning as it came to a halt. Isabella's heart dropped. Men in tailored suits stepped out first. Then he emerged, Daniel Adekunle. He was taller than she remembered from the news, his presence commanding silence without effort. His face was carved from cold stone, sharp jaw, dark eyes burning with something far more dangerous than anger: hatred. He walked toward her as if the ground itself owed him obedience. "So," he said, stopping in front of her, his voice calm but lethal. "You thought running back to this village would save you." Isabella shook her head slowly. "Sir, I don't understand what you mean." His lips curled, not in amusement, but disgust. "My mother's name is in ruins," Daniel continued, each word a blade. "Her foundation is under investigation, her dignity destroyed." His eyes bored into hers. "And every trail leads back to you." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Isabella's chest tightened. "I swear to you, I didn't do anything. I would never hurt her." Daniel laughed, once, short, hollow. "You poor girls always say that," he said. "You hide behind innocence when you've already sold your soul." The words struck harder than any slap. Tears burned her eyes. But she refused to let them fall. "Please," she whispered, "I am not your enemy." Daniel leaned closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "You destroyed my family," he said coldly, "and I will make you pay." That was the moment Isabella understood something terrible. This was not about truth. This was about vengeance. As Daniel turned away, signaling his men, Isabella felt the weight of judgment crush her spirit. Whatever punishment awaited her would not come from the law. It would come from the man who had already condemned her heart. And somewhere in the distance, the church bells rang again. This time, like a funeral. Isabella did not sleep that night. She lay on the thin mattress in her small room, staring at the cracked ceiling as shadows danced with every flicker of the lantern. Outside, the village was unusually quiet, as if even the crickets had chosen silence over gossip. Daniel Adekunle's words echoed in her head again and again. "You will pay." Her chest tightened each time she remembered the cold certainty in his eyes. Not rage, not confusion. Conviction. A man who had already decided her fate. At dawn, the sound of engines shattered the stillness. Isabella sat up sharply. Before she could reach the door, loud knocks thundered against it. Isabella Nowotaki, a deep voice called. Open the door. Her hands trembled as she pulled it open. Two men stood outside, lawyers by the look of them. Pressed suits, leather briefcases, faces trained into professional indifference. Behind them waited the same black SUV from the previous day, its presence like a bad omen. We have instructions to bring you to Lagos, one said flatly. To Lagos? Isabella whispered. Why? For a meeting, the man replied, with Mr. Daniel Adekunle. Her knees nearly gave way. The journey felt unreal. The road stretched endlessly as the village disappeared behind them. Isabella sat in the back seat, clutching her bag, watching unfamiliar cities replace familiar trees. No one spoke to her. No one explained anything. By the time they arrived at the Adekunle estate, her heart was pounding violently. The mansion rose before her like a fortress. Tall gates, white stone walls, manicured lawns too perfect to belong to real life. This was not a home. This was a courtroom. She was led inside and seated alone in a vast living room. Marble floors gleamed beneath her feet. Portraits of powerful men lined the walls. Everything whispered wealth, control, dominance. Minutes passed, then footsteps echoed. Daniel entered. He looked different, no suit this time, just a crisp white shirt with sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. His expression remained unchanged, cold, unreadable. You came, he said, as if it were inevitable. I didn't have a choice, Isabella replied softly. Daniel took a seat across from her, crossing his legs with infuriating calm. You never do, he said, not when you play games with powerful families. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't do anything wrong. I don't care, he replied. The words sliced cleanly through her chest. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The law will take years. Investigations, media storms. You will be dragged through courts until there's nothing left of you. Isabella swallowed hard. Then let the truth come out. Daniel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Oh, the truth will come out, he said, but not before you learn what it feels like to lose everything. She shook her head desperately. Please, whatever you think I did, I'm begging you, don't destroy my life. Daniel stood. This is mercy, he said. She looked up at him in confusion. Mercy? I could send you to prison, he continued, or let the media tear you apart. Instead, I've chosen a punishment that ensures silence, control, humiliation. Chill crept down her spine. Daniel turned to the men standing by the door. Bring in the documents. One of the lawyers stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the table. Daniel pushed it toward her. Read. Isabella's fingers shook as she opened it. Her breath left her lungs. At the top of the page, bold and unmistakable, were the words marriage agreement. Her vision blurred. Marriage? She whispered. To you? Yes, Daniel said calmly. You will marry me. The room spun. You can't, she cried. You hate me. I don't need to love you, he replied. I need to own the narrative. Once you're my wife, the scandal dies. You belong to me. Your silence is guaranteed. Tears streamed down her face now. This isn't justice. Daniel's eyes hardened. Justice is a luxury for the innocent. She looked down at the document again. Clauses, conditions, restrictions. No freedom, no love, no escape. And if I refuse? She asked, her voice barely audible. Daniel bent down until they were eye to eye. Then I destroy you, he said quietly. The finality in his voice crushed what little hope she had left. Isabella closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she whispered the words that sealed her fate. I'll do it. Daniel straightened. The wedding is in 2 weeks, he said. Prepare yourself. As he walked away, Isabella remained seated, tears soaking the pages of the contract. She had not been found guilty. She had been sentenced. And the punishment was a marriage that would change her life forever. The wedding day arrived wrapped in silence. Not the joyful kind filled with laughter and music, but the heavy, suffocating silence that follows a verdict already passed. Isabella sat before a tall mirror in a luxury hotel suite in Lagos, her reflection staring back at her like a stranger. Makeup artists fluttered around her, brushing powder onto her dark skin, pinning delicate pearls into her hair, adjusting a gown that cost more than her entire village combined. She looked beautiful, and she felt utterly empty. The white wedding dress clung softly to her slender frame, embroidered with crystals that caught the light like trapped stars. Anyone who saw her would think she was the luckiest bride alive, a poor village girl chosen by a billionaire. But Isabella knew the truth. This dress was not a gift. It was a shackle. Her hands trembled in her lap as she remembered the night before, how she had cried silently, pressing her face into the pillow so no one would hear, no mother to comfort her, no father to protect her, just a contract, a ring, and a man who despised her. A knock came at the door. "It's time," a woman said gently. Isabella stood on legs that felt weak and unreal. The church was grand, white marble, towering pillars, chandeliers glittering overhead. Guests filled the pews, dressed in expensive fabrics, their whispers rippling like waves. "Who is she? They say she trapped him. Poor girl, but money changes everything." Isabella walked down the aisle alone. No father, no brother, no one to give her away. Her heels echoed loudly with each step, the sound pounding in her chest like a countdown. At the altar stood Daniel Adekunle, tall, impeccable, untouchable. He wore a tailored black tuxedo, his expression carved from ice. He did not smile when he saw her, did not soften. His eyes passed over her beauty as if it meant nothing. When she reached him, then, he didn't offer his arm. The priest cleared his throat and began the ceremony. Isabella barely heard the words. Her mind was elsewhere, on the village she had left behind, on the life she would never return to, on the man standing beside her, who had sworn to punish her with this very moment. "Do you, Daniel Obina Adekunle, take Isabella Nwadike to be your lawful wedded wife?" "I do," Daniel answered immediately, his voice firm and emotionless. The words struck Isabella like a hammer. "Do you, Isabella Nwadike?" Her throat closed. The entire church waited. She looked up at Daniel then, searching, hoping, for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this nightmare might end. She found none. "I do," she whispered. The ring slid onto her finger, cold, heavy, final. The guests applauded. Isabella felt like screaming. The reception was even worse. Crystal glasses clinked. Cameras flashed. Music played softly in the background. Daniel's world celebrated while Isabella stood beside him like a carefully displayed possession. He did not touch her, did not speak to her, did not look at her. When guests congratulated them, Daniel responded politely. Isabella nodded when required, smiling until her cheeks ached. Vivian Okoye arrived halfway through the reception. She was stunning, tall, elegant, wrapped in red silk that turned heads instantly. Her eyes locked on Isabella, with thinly veiled amusement, before shifting to Daniel. "So this is your bride?" Vivian said smoothly, kissing Daniel's cheek. Isabella's fingers curled into her palm. "Congratulations," Vivian added, her gaze sharp. "I hope you know what you're doing." Daniel said nothing, but Isabella felt it. The tension, the history, the unspoken wounds. That night, when the reception finally ended, Daniel did not take Isabella to the bridal suite. Instead, he turned to her coolly. "You'll stay in the guest room," he said. "This marriage exists only in public." Her heart cracked quietly. "Yes," she replied. As the door closed behind her in the darkened hallway, Isabella pressed her hand to her chest, breathing through the pain. She was married, but she had never felt more alone, and somewhere deep within her, a small, fragile part of her heart whispered a truth she refused to believe just yet. This marriage would hurt far more than any punishment Daniel could have imagined. Morning arrived without warmth. Isabella woke in the unfamiliar guest room, still dressed in yesterday's pain. The wedding gown lay crumpled on a chair like a discarded dream, its white fabric mocking her exhaustion. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her body heavy with the realization that she had crossed into a life she could not escape. She was now Mrs. Adekunle. And yet, she had never felt more unwanted. She bathed quietly, changed into a simple cream dress provided by the house staff, and stepped into the vast mansion that would now be called her home. The floors gleamed. The air smelled faintly of expensive polish and control. Everything was perfect and entirely unwelcoming. Breakfast was laid out on a long dining table that could seat 12. Daniel sat at the head. He barely looked at her when she entered. "Sit," he said, without lifting his eyes from his tablet. Isabella obeyed, taking the chair farthest from him. Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Cutlery clinked softly as she forced herself to eat, though her appetite was gone. "There are rules," Daniel said suddenly. She stiffened. "You will not interfere in my business," he continued calmly. "You will not embarrass me in public. You will attend events when required, smile when cameras are present, and remain invisible when they are not. Invisible." "Yes," Isabella whispered. "You will have a room of your own," he added. "My private space is off limits." Her heart sank further, though she told herself she had expected nothing else. "And one more thing," Daniel said, finally looking at her. His eyes were cold, calculating. "Do not mistake this arrangement for affection. I married you to control a situation, not because I want you." The words landed with brutal precision. "I understand," Isabella replied, though her voice trembled. Daniel stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "Good. My driver will take you shopping later. You'll need clothes suitable for my world." My world. As he walked away, Isabella remained seated, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Days passed. Isabella learned the rhythms of the mansion quickly. When Daniel left for work, when staff changed shifts, which corridors echoed with loneliness. The servants treated her with careful politeness, unsure whether to see her as mistress or mistake. Daniel barely spoke to her. When he did, it was brief, necessary, cold. At social events, he placed a possessive hand on her waist for the cameras, his touch firm but empty. The moment they were alone again, he withdrew as if burned. Isabella learned to wear her silence like armor, but Daniel noticed things he wished he didn't. He noticed how she thanked every staff member by name, how she never raised her voice, how she spent long hours on the balcony at night, staring into the distance as if searching for something she had lost. One evening, he overheard her crying. It was unintentional. He had returned home late and passed by her door when he heard the soft, broken sounds she tried to hide. His steps slowed. He stopped. For a brief moment, he considered knocking. Instead, he walked away. Vivian Okoye arrived the following afternoon. She swept into the mansion with confidence, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her red lipstick curved into a knowing smile when she saw Daniel. "So," she said lightly, "this is how it ends for us." Daniel didn't rise to greet her. "Why are you here?" Vivian laughed softly. "I wanted to see her. The girl who replaced me." Isabella stood frozen near the staircase, having just come downstairs. Vivian turned, eyes flicking over her with practiced scrutiny. "She's simpler than I expected." Daniel said nothing. Isabella swallowed hard, forcing her shoulders back. Vivian stepped closer, her voice honeyed and cruel. "Enjoy the mansion, my dear. Men like Daniel don't fall in love. They collect." The words stung because a part of Isabella feared they were true. Later that night, Isabella stood alone on the balcony, the city lights of Lagos flickering below. She wrapped her arms around herself, fighting the cold. Behind her, Daniel watched silently. He told himself he felt nothing. But for the first time since the accusation, doubts stirred, quiet, unwelcome, and dangerous. Because the woman he had married to punish was not fighting back. She was enduring, and that unsettled him far more than hatred ever could. Night softened the mansion, but it did not bring Isabella peace. The corridors were quiet, lit only by dim wall lamps that cast long shadows across marble floors. From the outside, the Adekunle mansion looked serene, perfect. Inside, Isabella felt like a ghost, moving through a life that was not hers. She closed her bedroom door gently and leaned against it, her breath shuddering. She had held herself together all day. She had smiled at staff. She had nodded when spoken to. She had endured Vivian's sharp glances and Daniel's silence without complaint. But now, alone, her strength cracked. Isabella slid slowly to the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. The tears came quietly at first, then harder, her shoulders shaking as sobs escaped her lips, despite her efforts to silence them. She pressed her hand to her mouth. "Don't let anyone hear you." That had become her rule. Her tears soaked into the thin fabric of her dress as memories flooded her mind. Her small village, the sound of laughter she once knew, the freedom of choosing where to go and who to be. All of it felt impossibly far away. She wasn't asking for love, she realized. She was only asking not to be treated like an enemy. Down the hallway, Daniel stepped out of his study. He had intended to retire for the night, his mind still tangled in numbers and contracts. But as he passed Isabella's door, a sound stopped him. Soft, broken, a woman crying. He froze. The sound slipped through the thick wood, muffled, restrained, as if whoever was inside was trying desperately not to be heard. Isabella. Daniel's jaw tightened. This wasn't part of the plan. He told himself to keep walking. He reminded himself of his mother's ruined reputation, of the anger that had driven him to this marriage. He reminded himself that Isabella was supposed to suffer. So why did his chest feel tight? The crying grew quieter, turning into small, helpless gasps. Daniel lifted his hand, then stopped. If he knocked, what would he say? "Sorry? I didn't mean to hurt you this much?" Those words felt dangerous. Slowly, he lowered his hand and turned away. But he did not forget the sound. The days that followed blurred into each other. Isabella became quieter, if that was even possible. She spoke only when spoken to, moved gently through the mansion, and spent most of her time in the small sitting room attached to her bedroom. She avoided Daniel, not out of bitterness, but fear. Fear that if she looked at him too long, she would see him clearly for what he was to her, a powerful stranger holding her life in his hands. Daniel noticed the change immediately. He noticed how she flinched when their eyes met, how she withdrew her hand quickly if it brushed against his, how she no longer lingered in shared spaces. She was disappearing. One afternoon, Daniel found her in the garden. She sat on a stone bench beneath a flowering tree, sunlight filtering softly through the leaves. A small notebook rested in her lap, untouched. She wasn't writing. She was staring into nothing. Isabella. She startled slightly at the sound of his voice and stood at once. "Yes?" The distance in her tone unsettled him. "You don't need to stand every time I enter a room," he said. "I know," she replied quietly. "I just prefer to." Silence stretched between them. Daniel studied her then, really studied her. The dark circles beneath her eyes, the way she held herself like someone bracing for impact. "You're not a prisoner," he said, more sharply than intended. "You have everything you need here." She met his gaze for the first time that day. "Except peace," she said softly. The honesty of it struck him harder than anger would have. Daniel said nothing. That night, Isabella cried again, and again Daniel heard her. But this time, instead of walking away immediately, he stood outside her door longer than he meant to. Long enough to realize something he had refused to admit. Whatever crime he believed she had committed, no guilty woman cried like this. And for the first time since the accusation, doubt planted itself firmly in Daniel Adekunle's heart. Not loud, not dramatic, just dangerous enough to change everything. Hatred was supposed to be simple. Daniel Adekunle had built his life on control, of people, of outcomes, of emotion. Anger was a tool he understood. Revenge had a structure. You punish, you dominate, you move on. But doubt? Doubt was chaos. It crept into him in quiet moments, uninvited and unwelcome. Like now, Daniel stood before the mirror in his dressing room, adjusting his cufflinks for a board meeting he had attended 100 times before. His reflection stared back at him, composed and ruthless as ever, yet something beneath the surface had shifted. He hadn't slept well in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard it again, the sound of Isabella crying, soft, broken. Nothing like the tears of a guilty woman caught in her schemes. He clenched his jaw and turned away. Focus. Isabella kept her distance. She followed his rules precisely, almost obsessively. She appeared when summoned, spoke when addressed, smiled when cameras demanded it, and vanished when the performance ended. But Daniel began to notice the cost. She ate little, she moved slowly, and sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, her hands trembled. One afternoon, Daniel returned home earlier than expected. The mansion was unusually quiet. As he passed the sitting room near the west wing, he heard voices, low, respectful. Isabella's voice. "I'm fine, truly," she was saying gently. Daniel stopped. Through the half-open door, he saw her seated with one of the housemaids, an older woman named Mrs. F.A. Isabella held a small first aid kit, carefully cleaning a cut on the woman's hand. "You should have told someone," Isabella added softly. "Infections can be dangerous." Mrs. F.A. smiled. "You worry too much, madam." Isabella shook her head. "Someone has to." Daniel watched, unseen. There was no performance here, no cameras, no reason to pretend. Yet she was kind. When Isabella finished, she thanked the woman, thanked her, as if she were the guest, not the mistress of the house. Mrs. F.A. left with a grateful bow. Isabella remained seated for a moment, her shoulders slumping the second she was alone. She pressed her fingers to her eyes, as if fighting exhaustion rather than tears. Something twisted inside Daniel's chest. That evening, they attended a charity gala. Isabella wore a soft emerald gown, simple, elegant, nothing extravagant. Her hair was styled neatly, her posture perfect. She looked composed. The cameras loved her. "Mr. and Mrs. Adekunle," someone called. Daniel placed his hand at the small of his back out of habit. Isabella stiffened, almost imperceptibly. The movement unsettled him more than he expected. Throughout the night, she played her role flawlessly. She spoke politely, smiled when required, never once embarrassed him. At one point, a woman laughed loudly nearby. "So brave of you to marry her," she said to Daniel, not bothering to lower her voice. After everything, Isabella's smile faltered. Before Daniel could stop himself, he spoke. "That's enough," he said sharply. The woman blinked in surprise. My wife's name is Isabella," Daniel continued, his tone icy. "And I won't have her spoken about like she's not in the room." Silence followed. Isabella looked at him then. Really looked at him. Her eyes widened slightly, confusion mixing with something dangerously close to hope. Daniel released her hand immediately, as if burned. He didn't speak to her again that night. But the damage, to his resolve, was done. Later, in the quiet of the mansion, Isabella sat in the small library, flipping through a book without reading it. Daniel paused at the doorway. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said stiffly. She looked up, startled. "Thank you." He hesitated. "If anyone makes you uncomfortable at these events, tell me." Her brows knit together slightly. "Why?" The question hung between them. Daniel didn't have an answer that made sense anymore. "Because," he said finally, "you're my wife." The words sounded different now. He left before she could respond. That night, Isabella didn't cry, and Daniel noticed. Instead, she stood on the balcony again, staring at the city lights. This time, Daniel joined her, keeping a careful distance. Neither spoke, but for the first time since their marriage, the silence between them wasn't cruel. It was uncertain, and uncertainty, Daniel realized as he watched Isabella breathe in the night air, like someone learning how to survive, was the beginning of everything he feared, because hatred was cracking, and in its place, something far more dangerous was beginning to grow. Daniel didn't plan to fall in love with her. It happened the night he finally allowed himself to see Isabella, not as a punishment, not as a mistake, but as the woman who had quietly changed him. She was standing in their room, folding clothes with careful hands, when it struck him how gentle she was, how patient, how she had endured his coldness without ever losing her dignity. "I can't keep pretending anymore," Daniel said, his voice rough. Isabella turned, surprised by the emotion in his eyes. "I tried to hate you," he continued, stepping closer. "I told myself this marriage meant nothing, but I was lying, to myself most of all." His voice broke. "I'm sorry, Isabella, for marrying you out of anger, for the pain, for every tear." Tears filled her eyes. "All I ever wanted," she whispered, "was honesty." He reached for her, slowly, giving her the choice. When she didn't pull away, he drew her into his arms, holding her like something precious he had almost lost. That night, love finally overpowered pride. There was no anger between them, no punishment, only tenderness, apologies spoken in quiet breaths, and a closeness that came from forgiveness rather than force. For the first time, they came together as husband and wife, fully, willingly, and with hearts finally aligned. From that moment on, Daniel could no longer control the love he felt for her. He showed it in the way he watched over her, in the way his voice softened when he said her name, in the way the mansion slowly filled with warmth. Weeks later, Isabella stood in the bathroom, hands trembling as she stared at the test, pregnant. When she told Daniel, he went silent, then pulled her into his arms, emotion flooding his face. "A child," he whispered, "with you." He kissed her forehead gently. "I promise you, Isabella, this love will never hurt you again." What began as a marriage of punishment ended as a family built on forgiveness, and the man who once tried to control her fate ended up surrendering his heart completely. If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more of the story. See you again in a next story. Thank you for watching.